Hello. What you're about to see is an excerpt from a research seminar given at the Swedish International Centre of Education for Sustainable Development at Uppsala University at the beginning of September 2015. The title of the seminar was called "I Can't Remember the Name of the Dog, Stories About and Not About Drought, Flooding and Climate Change." This part of the seminar tries to explore the way that stories are their own kind of knowledge system, their own way of knowing. And by bringing storytelling into the debate around climate change allows us to gain new perspectives, new voices, and also greater texture and greater depth to the debate around issues as serious as this. Do you think that using story might be a way of getting people into the debate and on a more of a level playing field? I just wanted to show you a couple of stories, very quick stories that weren't ones that we made, but when we were preparing this project, we were looking for examples of drought narratives, and we came across a couple. So this first one is from Australia. This is from the Murray River, and this is a short snippet of an old guy, and he's well in his 90s when he's telling this story, and it was, I think probably about 10 years ago this was made. And he's telling a story around a photograph and around a drought that happened, I think about 1914, when he was a babe in arms. And I'll say a little bit about it afterwards.
I remember that downstream, about half a mile from this site, there was a deep hole in the river, and there's an old gentleman called Vestorini, Aklis Vestorini, and other citizens as well. They took steam engine pumps down into the bed of the river to pump water out of this hole to keep some water flowing down the channel system to Murrabit. So I guess that sort of thing happened up and down the river to some extent. They just used whatever water they could that was in the holes in the river. Here you have my grandparents on my mother's side, Albert Hall's large buggy with his family, an old pioneer, Jack Watson, the Lake family from Myall, Dawson's nursery cart, or dog cart as we called it, Wilson family from Myall, and our own family buggy at the second from the right. I was a small child wrapped in a shawl at that stage, and I can remember the horse's name was Queenie because we drove her to school for many years after that. I don't know the name of the dog.
I think there's an awful lot going on in that story. There is some information that he gives around the actual practicalities of dealing with the drought, about bringing the pump down to the river and all those kinds of things. For me, though, what that story is about the solidarity of the community. What happens when a community is faced with a situation like drought, and how that comes together. The fact that he shows us that community and names everybody, the fact he can't remember the name of the dog, in a way for me highlights the importance of the name of the dog. That he points out he can't remember. He can remember the name of the horse. The dog is as important as Queenie, the horse. He remembers that. Can't remember the name of the dog, though. And the fact that he draws our attention to that, for me, is what that communicates is the importance of these relationships between the community and the solidarity that engenders. And that is the kind of knowledge that is very difficult to capture in the hydrological data. those kinds of social aspects of what happens when drought hits a community, time and time again, because the Murray River is not, the communities there are not strangers to drought. It's a very regular occurrence. And what this does, I suppose, for me, is highlight that these stories are about drought, but they're also not about drought. What they're doing is capturing all of the other things that are important when drought or anything happens to a community or to a family or to an individual. It's about the human resilience, it's about human relationships, it's about the emotions, and it's ultimately about values. What do we as people value in terms of our environment, in terms of our social, our human relationships, in terms of our economic relationships, and in terms of our culture? And those are the things, I think. So stories, in that sense, means we can understand stories as data, if we wish. Stories are data, and the data that they are communicating is the data of values. That then leads us to think about, okay, so how do we extract value from the story? How do we understand? How do we interpret those stories? And there are different ways that we can do that. So I want to show you another story, another short story that we found as we were doing this research on the internet. And this is a guy, a farmer in Iowa, in the States. And it's a very short story. And what I'm going to show you, before I actually show you his story, I'm going to show you a transcription. This is a very simple technique, and it's one that I actually stole from a Northern Ireland poet called Liam Macaulay back in the 1990s. He may well have stolen it from somebody else as a way of transcribing oral testimony. And what you do is, as you're writing it out, rather than try and put in all the ers and ums and everything, every time you sense that there's a pause, or there's a stumble perhaps, or a hesitation, you simply start a new line. Okay? So what you get is something that looks like free verse. You get a kind of poetic representation of the speech. I like it partly because I think it captures some of the poetry of everyday spoken language. But what it also does, it reveals certain aspects of the story that you might otherwise miss. For instance, it shows very clearly that repetition, an inch of rain, an inch of rain. If you were a literature scholar, you'd write an essay on that repetition and what that meant and why that was significant. You've got short lines and longer lines. What is the meaning behind those things? What are the hesitations? What is going on here? So we stockpile grass and it isn't ... It's not going to happen this year. This actually is a moment, it's very significant, because in the narrative this is the moment where this, horny-handed son of the soil, this Iowan farmer, almost breaks down emotionally. And you almost miss that when you watch it. And it's not till you see it laid out like that, and you think, hang on here, what's going on there? And you go back to the story, and suddenly you start to understand some of what is going on. Now, it's a slightly creative process, because if you were to do this, you may come up with slightly different choices as to where the lines start and end. But what it does, I think very importantly, is it puts the emphasis on the listening. So the story becomes not what is told, but what is heard. And I think very often we tend to forget that storytelling is actually about story listening as much as it is about the telling. So it really puts the listener, i.e. you, in the driving seat of extracting the meaning.
Well, the issue is we only got an inch of rain in June and an inch of rain in July, so the grass didn't grow. So we pulled about 75% of the cows up here to the place and hayed them for over 2 months. We're going to have extra feed supply for this winter, because last year we We had pasture clear up to the first of the year, so stockpiled grass, and it's not going to happen this year.
Where we are with this is kind of at beginnings with some of this material, and we're trying to develop ways in which we can better integrate the narrative and the science, rather than the situation that I'm sure we're often faced with in cross-disciplinary work, where you have different disciplines trying to stand their ground and to build their own little silos around. We're trying to open those up and try to get in the discussion going between the narrative and the science. And it's early days with some of this stuff, but I think my own feeling, personally, and you may feel legitimately very different, is that there's a lot of data that's contained within these experiences, within these stories, that we are currently missing, we are currently not capturing. And if we are capturing, it's not being entered into the debate at the same level as other kinds of knowledge. And if we are to solve some of these really big issues that face us at the moment around climate change and its consequences, and the economic and the social consequences of those issues, then we really need to find a way that brings those wide range of voices equally to the table in order to solve them.